Hello, this is my project evaluation for my proposal. I've got up here my my whole proposal. We can start looking at the podcast. I think starting with my podcast, I think I've got here. This is the sort of me talking through it, and then this is sort of the notes and what I've written out, and sort of the information that I've talked about. Um, I think I think the podcast went well. I decided to do the podcast nearer the end of the project rather than the end of the proposal, rather than rather than at the start. I thought that was a better idea because it enabled me to do some research first of sort of what my product and my project was going to be, and then once I'd done that, I could sort of talk through it and you know talk about what actually I was going to do and how I wanted to do everything. I think looking at it, I think I in my podcast, I think I showed a clear idea of what I wanted. Because I've here, if you look, sort of written out sort of the sound I want and sort of how I can achieve it. Um, and sort of in the podcast, I've talked about sort of some inspirations behind the EP, and sort of how I will actually sort of create it, what recording techniques I will use and things like that. I think here I've sort of talked a bit about sort of recording and mixing, about the sort of sounds that I want. And at the bottom here, I've just sort of got the roles that I will embody when doing this. I talked about a bit of sort of merchandise and distribution and things, which I think is good. I think a good thing about my podcast is I feel I covered a lot of topics. So I tried, I've mentioned everything that I need to, which is good. All similar bands here. How I'm going to record and stuff, and I think overall, I think the podcast was quite successful. I think potentially, if I were to improve my podcast, I think I'd probably need to be sort of have a few more specifics in there. Sort of when talking about kind of mixing name. So I've mentioned I'll use EQ and compression and things, but sort of say kind of exactly um how I could do it, and sort of how I can um sort of exactly how I'll use each plugin, and sort of in what way will I manipulate the sound and things. I think in future, possibly going into more detail, um, possibly would be better. But so this is what's happened. So moving on, this is sort of the concept of my EP. I've got the band's social links here. I'll just show you the Facebook page for now. Um, but yeah, it just gets up the link, and then you can just sort of everything, sort of the band's things. You can look at events, see what events they've done and things. Look at all their events and stuff, and there's just that, which is good. Um, but here I've got a sort of a general overview of what I'm doing, and sort of the main influences as that the band has sort of generally. And then I've gone into each individual track with all these are the lyrics here, and then I've sort of written out an evaluation of the song and sort of the influences here, um, and sort of what the lyrics mean and stuff. So what are the so it's sort of an understanding of what the song actually means, and then I can use sort of the meanings of the songs to um, sort of to describe how I want it to sound. I can sort of relate the meaning of the song to sonically how I want it to sound, and they can relate together. And then I've done this for each song, sort of the lyrics, and then written out the influences and sort of what they mean. And then I've done it for the third song here, the same again. Oh yeah, that this is just a poem which inspired the lyrics of this song. Um, I think that was quite good because it's sort of it's not just sort of song inspirations, sort of the lyrics have been inspired by the poem, and I think that sort of adds another element to the song. And then I've also done it for the last song here. So the um, the influences. That's it. The influences, and then the sort of what it means, what the song means, and things. I think doing this was very useful because it gave me a good idea of actually what I'm trying to accomplish. That made me think, okay, what actually are these songs? What factors have created the songs? And by understanding that, it's allowed me to sort of move forward and be like, okay, now that I understand what creates these, what's the songs made up of? How can I use when recording? How can I use the techniques and make the best decisions to really let the songs breathe and make them, make the songs one in their own, and really, make the songs as best as they can be. I think this was definitely a good idea on my part, and I think it was very useful to me to do this. I think it really helped me understand what the songs were about. I think we can move on to sort of the research and sort of problem solving that I've done. I started with doing a couple songs here, writing about their sort of their influences and stuff. I think what was hard about doing this is first off, finding the right song because there's just, an infinite amount of songs. But I think also understanding, listening to each song and thinking how they got that sound. How did the producers achieve that sound? And I think that was sort of the hard part for this. I think I've written out sort of an evaluation of the song and sort of what parts of the song sort of relate to my tracks and the band, because because not the whole song relates. Like for the Killers, I think the drum sound relates quite nicely to the band's songs, but the way the lyrics sound, it's a bit too. I think it's a bit too electronic. I think the Radiohead's Tom York's lyric sound is much more like the sound I want to go for, which I think is good. And then I've moved on to drum recordings. I've got a link here, and then sort of I've written out a bit about it, and then sort of based on that, I've moved into testing out some drum sounds of my own. And so I describe what I did, how how I did it, and then sort of a description of what I did, the sounds I got, and any problems that occurred. Um, like when recording the kick drum, there were a few bad frequencies. So using EQ, we took out some frequencies there, but then that also led to the the bass of the kick being slightly reduced, and so meaning it's felt slightly balloon like. So at the time, this seemed like a good idea, but then looking at it afterwards and listening to it, possibly not such a good idea. And then moving on to sort of the snare sound, and then trying to find out, what would be the best sort of snare sound. Because originally I had just the wallet, but then I wasn't quite sure on that, so I wanted to try out different sounds, and so I did, and then came to a conclusion on that. And this is just going through sort of the processes of what I did, how I recorded, and sort of the toms here, and the problems I had. I think, yeah, with the floor tom, it creates sort of a rumbling sound, so that was a problem. And then this is me just sort of talking about how I'd fix it, and stuff like that. And then this is still on the drums, talking about the different overhead configurations. I used two overhead configurations. One was an XY here, and then also a spaced pair with two different room mics. I've got a Coles here, and then I've got an Aston Origins there. So it just sort of gives a different sound and which one I prefer. And then this is just sort of an ending overview of what I thought about the whole process. And then I move on to guitar recordings. It's a similar idea to the drums, just sort of what I did, and sort of what inspired it and stuff like that, and going through it. I think doing this recording process was definitely very useful because it gave me an idea of actually what sounds good and actually what possibly doesn't sound that good. Like I tested out these two mics and thought actually the Aston sounded better with the Marshall, um, and just gave a sort of a warmer feel, which is what I liked. So I learned that actually I'd probably use the Aston if I were to record. I also learned that actually, using a dynamic mic, didn't actually sound that good. So potentially just using a condenser was better. So I think doing this research definitely gave me a good understanding of what I should do and how I should record. I think if I didn't do this research, I'd be a bit lost when I got to recording my EP, because actually I'd be like, I'm not really sure what I'm doing. I haven't really done this. So I think this was definitely a good experience and enabled me to really understand how I should record. And then I've gone on to sort of some drum mixing ideas. There's a few more links and sort of me talking about how I would use these links and what I've taken from them. And then similar here, it's just sort of me testing out different mixing ideas, and sort of seeing which, if I like them, whether I would use them in my mixing. And actually, after doing that with these particular techniques, I thought actually I probably won't use them, because I thought the idea of this was using a gate on the whole, sort of on the stereo out, um, or on having, and just sort of taking on the drums, doing it on the whole drum group, and then slowly lifting it up until it's just sort of the main hit. But actually, I thought that took away from sort of quite a lot of the atmosphere. So actually, after doing this, I thought actually I probably wouldn't do this. But I think definitely doing this, I learned something there. Um, which is still a good thing moving forward. Even if I'm not going to do it, I still learned something, which is good. I think, and then a sort of a similar kind of thing with guitar mixing, sort of testing out different effects, and how I'd use them, getting sort of different guitar sounds. And I think again, this process was definitely a useful process, because it a lot of the sounds, some sounds I liked. I quite like the full combo guitar combination, but potentially I might move the positioning of the microphone a bit more center, and I would possibly turn down the treble a bit and possibly a little bit of the bass. But I think the combination of the amp and the speaker I liked a lot. But then when I did this, how I did this is I used one song, but then cut up each section to create sort of a different sound for that section. So it kind of give an idea of what sort of sounds I'm going for. And I remember for the chorus, I added in a pedal board, but actually, listening to it, I wasn't a huge fan of the pedal board, and so was thinking when I'm mixing my guitars and stuff, I actually might not add in um, a pedal board. I sort of looked at this because I thought, you know, it was quite a good idea. I thought for the bass, if I end up DIing the bass, which is a possibility. Obviously, these are for guitar, but it's I can transfer it to a bass and sort of add a bass amplifier if I end up DIing it, which potentially possibly maybe due to lack of time when recording or you know um, microphones not working or whatever possibility could happen. It's a possibility that DIing might happen, and so I think it's a good idea to prepare for that. I can add a bass amp in Logic if I need to, and that's just sort of an overall thing. And then it's the same with the sort of vocal mixing, going through the same kind of processes, and then sort of general mixing as well, and then sort of mastering and promotion here at the end. I think the overall research was was probably the most useful task that I did because it will contribute to a lot of the EP. I think it will contribute to a lot of what I am going to do, but also a lot of what I'm not going to do. I learned a lot about doing this, actually what's the best ways to go about sort of mixing and recording. And also I learned actually the processes that are good and I should use and the processes that are not so good. I think I can also move on to my SWOT analysis here. It's me talking through. I'm not gonna play the video, but it's me talking through sort of my strengths and my weaknesses, um, and sort of the opportunities and threats and stuff. And I think doing that was actually very useful for myself because it allowed me to think, what are my strengths and weaknesses, and then how can I use those strengths to my advantage, and how can I increase my weaknesses so they're not so weak. I'm slightly better at them. And I thought, and talking about the opportunities and threats, I talked about how the course has given a lot of opportunities and things, and I think that it's, for me personally, enabled me to you know learn recording and miking techniques and record in a studio. But also the threats and the limitations of there's a lot of people on the course and a lot of people will be wanting to use the studio and things like that. So I think the SWOT analysis definitely enabled me to think about myself and think of my strengths and weaknesses, and also what are the problems of the project that actually I might come across, and how will I prevent those. I think moving forward, you know, for now, I think I will use a lot of this information. The research and problem solving, I think, is a big part because I know a lot of the recording techniques and stuff I am going to use when recording. Like when I tested out the drums with the XY overhead pattern, I know that I, I want to use this over the space bet because I preferred the sound. It gave a more tighter drum sound, which I thought was better. I thought fitted my tracks better, and so I'm going to use that. I think that um, I think the research and problem solving has definitely helped me move forward and understand how I'm going to create my EP. What processes am I actually going to do? And I think it really helped me understand what I need to do to, for this project to be a success. I think by the end of the project, I want to have a um, sort of a full EP made. I want sort of everything I need to do to be completed to a high standard. And I know I don't have loads of time. I know, I'm on a limited time plan here. So I know I need to plan out plan out my weeks, and sort of make sure that everything is sort of planned out so I don't fall behind and don't miss any deadlines or anything like that. And I think from what's happened with the uh, with the proposal so far, I think I'm on track to do that, because so far I've done everything, and also what I've got is got a time schedule with my weeks, sort of like what I've done in each session, and sort of written out what I've done and evaluated what I thought of that session, and then gone through it and sort of written out what I thought and my how how that week went and what I need to do for the next week to catch up. And then I've done it for the second week as well. I've done sort of a video evaluation here, sort of what I thought, and then sort of things like that. So I'm sort of going through, and then weekly writing out what I want to accomplish, and then how I'm and then after sort of that session, my opinions on it, and sort of how successful I was in that lesson. And then I've got this week, sort of each week, and then sort of going through sort of my evaluation and things. But I think definitely planning and sort of writing out how you're going to sort of what your aims are for that week or that session is definitely good, and I think that's the way to move forward and to stay on top of all the work. So I think I will look back every session and see how well I've done for that session and what I need to do to stay on top. And so that's sort of how I plan to move forward. And sort of that's kind of everything now. So that's the end, and thank you.